Hello, hello, hello. I'm Chelsey.
And I'm Sammy, and this is
Deepish.
I feel like I just got a really fun behind the scenes.
I know you're like, hello, what's happening? Well, we have our very first guest, and that is the beautiful Kylie. Yes.
Oh, really?
Yep. You're going to be our very first guest. We have Kylie Olsen forever in my heart. But
Still on your cell phone as Olsen?
you will never be Kylie Lindsey.
It's Chelsey and Sammy Warner in my phone.
Sammy, like, when she texted me her new email address was like Samantha Stewart. I was like, who is that? Never be Samantha Stewart.
We need, hang on, pause. Let's just address the elephant in the room for all the thousands and 9 million subscribers watching this. You guys are probably the only two people I would come and agree to be filmed with.
I know.
When I am 9 months pregnant.
Yeah, literally
like,
about to give birth.
Having a baby come out of my body in 17 days. And so
weeks.
If we have just every...
And can I just say the cutest pregnant
mom.
It literally looks like she has a basketball under her shirt. That's how cute. It's just the classic, like what you dream about.
BTS more. Chelsey just came and like pulled it down to reveal it.
I know, she had the blanket covering her stomach and I was like, let's tuck that right under that bad boy.
Yep.
So we have Kylie. Her married name is Kylie Lindsey.
I go by Carrie too.
We are going to be talking about her spiritual journey. We grew up in the same town, Utah County. And so I think that it'll be really interesting and fun to hear your relationship with spirituality growing up in a very predominantly Mormon community, and then what your transition has been since then and where you're at now spiritual wise.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm so happy you're here. And honestly, this is a more serious topic and it's kind of scary. It's scary opening up, especially within our culture, growing up here and everything. So I'm just really grateful that you are so open. And we literally texted you like 2 days ago, would you be open to this? And you're like, I will be there. And so I'm really happy and thank you for being here. And hopefully this can help someone potentially connect with us and with you. So thank you.
No, thank you guys. Because honestly, you say that and it sounds so cheesy, but hopefully when you say help someone connect with you guys or connect with me, I had to check myself. When you guys texted me, I was like, okay, am I going to say yes or am I going to say no? If I say no, why am I going to say no? If I say yes, why am I going to say yes? And I realized I was like, oh, I always hide from this stuff. I have hid from this stuff for so long. And so being here is not because I feel like I have anything huge to say that other people don't have to say or something revelatory that people haven't heard before. But I just felt so deeply. And it's interesting what like carrying this baby, especially a daughter this time, has done, because I now feel like I hold myself to a different responsibility of just like, I don't want to hide, and I never want to send the message to her that she has to hide when it's something that I don't need to feel bad for. And so it was like, okay. And I said this to you guys before, and I really sincerely mean it. Even if it was just sitting down with the two of you, I would still jump at this opportunity just because I feel like it's helping me connect with Kylie more, and hopefully I can set that example for this little female I'm about to bring into the world.
Yeah.
So thank you both so much.
I love that. And honestly, I'm so happy you're here because it is like even me and Sammy starting this.
Yeah.
I had similar feelings to how you felt when I texted you. Like, should I do this? Why wouldn't I do this? But then you follow the path through that anxiety and pressure and uncomfortability of like, I'm going to do this. And I guarantee after you do this, you're going to be happy that you had the experience. Even just coming here, I'm sure it's like, this is fun and I'm with my friends and
100%.
And just pushing yourself. And your voice does matter. And honestly, I couldn't think of anyone better that I would want to have this conversation with because you are my spiritual guru. I feel like I can talk to you for hours about anything. And you have such a beautiful soul. And I'm so grateful that I have your friendship, but I'm excited to kind of hear and for you to explain your journey.
That's super sweet.
There is something to be said about even just sitting down and talking through things.
Yeah.
With connecting with yourself and so much power in sharing your story. Like being able to share your story on a format like this where we obviously know bits and pieces of you, but like let's start from the beginning and let's hear every step of the way and how it molded and shaped you. You don't really get to sit down and like recap that. Even just having that for yourself is so powerful.
Oh, and it was weird in the few days since you guys were like, let's chat about this. And I was forced to sit and think about the actual chronological events that happened. And I'm like, oh, I don't know that I've ever sat and fully gone back and tried to pinpoint certain events and how they influenced me. But I also want to make it very clear that humans are so fallible and our memories are so fallible. And I think these things in this format specifically made me so nervous because it's not only difficult, it's impossible to try to condense 31 years of life and to try to do that accurately and quickly.
Yeah, and to do it justice.
And to do it justice. It's like, I really believe that it's like somebody saying like, oh, what's the key to a healthy marriage? It's like, I could say communication and then I'm going to be falling asleep tonight and panicking that I gave the wrong answer. Cause I'm like, wait, no, it's so much more than that. And that was my fear coming into this, is trying to condense it and then panicking later on of like, oh no, but there's so much more to it. And it didn't really encompass everything. And I just have to realize from the top of this that that's going to be impossible. This is just a like tiny attempt at giving my story and my experience, and it's never going to do it justice. And
well, I think it's okay to know that this is a snapshot of time and where you are now.
Yep.
And it's subject to change. We did an episode where I shared the story of losing my mom. And we talked about a lot of my spirituality and my beliefs of losing her. But Chelsey reminded me, like, this is the stage that you're at, and it's always going to change. And so it's okay. This is a snapshot in time of where you are now, and you don't have to hold yourself to doing it justice and making exactly how you feel, or stay awake tonight feeling like, oh, I forgot to say this, or I didn't mention this. It's okay, and it's going to be beautiful.
Well, nothing is concrete, right? Even in the episode that you guys released about change, and I thought it was so funny because it was, oh, Sammy's been amazing with change. And then it was like, yeah, but however many years ago, change was really hard for Sammy. And it's always changing. It's so malleable. So thanks for that. I feel like it takes the pressure off a little bit of like, if anybody hears this, I don't need to be stressed that our conversation is going to be the summary of Kylie.
Exactly.
It's a snapshot.
Exactly.
So that's good. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so let's rewind a little bit to like early on, kind of your relationship with religion, spirituality. So kind of explain that.
Well, I feel like only a Mormon speaking to other Mormons can understand it. And I say the word Mormon because it's so much more than, am I going to church every Sunday? I'm like, this is our heritage. This is the city we grew up in. You're a fish in water. It's very hard to describe to people who have not experienced it when it is where you are on Sundays. It's where you go during the week. It's what your family is, your extended family is, most your friend group. It's very difficult to look back and say, this is what it was like, when it's all I knew. I still hardly know anything different because I still live here and it's still all that we know. But with that being said, again, at 31 years old, as I try to look back and piece together certain things for 6-year-old Kylie, I'm like, oh, that's so interesting that it was beyond part of my life. It was life because there were 6 kids in my family. And so every Sunday we're sitting on the, second row together. Our whole family's there, extended family's there. My dad is in bishopric callings. So on top of it being a familial thing and holidays, summers, family, extended family events, all revolves around this thing. And then on top of it, it was like how my family ate dinner every night. Like my dad's livelihood came from the church.
Yeah, so explain that a little bit.
He's a really funny example of like Utah subculture, because if you go outside of Mormons, like nobody would know who my dad is, but inside Mormon culture, it's like, oh yeah, he's an artist. His name's Greg Olson. He paints pictures of Jesus. And so all growing up, it was my dad's livelihood comes from painting Mormon subjects to sell to Mormons. And then it was like, I go to church on Sunday and I see a picture of myself sitting on Jesus's lap in the primary room, right? And General Conference comes around and there's like a picture of Jesus that my dad had painted thrown up on the screen.
You were embedded into that culture. Like it was
100%.
Yeah.
It's truly like there was just no separation. It was
life. Do you feel like that was a little like bit of pressure, or, okay, we have to hold ourselves to a higher standard because my dad is Greg Olson and we kind of like portray this idyllic Mormon family. He's the guy, the artist, painting pictures of Jesus. Like, did you feel any pressure of living up to that Olsen name?
Yeah, and I don't think I realized that until later on. Until I started dating, and especially after high school, where I felt like I feel like being his daughter preceded me. And that sounds so dumb. Again, it's Utah subculture.
But who your parents are and what they do is so much about who you
Yes.
are too. No matter what their occupation is or their reputation, that does
It's
follow
so
you
true.
into dating. And tell me about your
Yes.
dad. Tell me about your mom. It's a
Yes.
huge part of who you are.
It's such a good point, and nobody escapes that. And it's just weird when people are like, so does your dad, like, has he ever seen Jesus?
Yeah, and you're like,
And I'm just like, no. Like, my
we confirm
dad
that
got
that
that
he
idea
has a
from,
beard?
yeah, he's like, I got that idea for that painting sitting around the family dinner table, and like our neighbor's weird kid threw it out there. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It was always people kind of pushing their assumptions onto us of, oh my gosh, this guy must have dreams about Jesus, and he's talking to God, and God is telling him what to paint. There was just weird things, you know. He would do public events, and people would come up and just be like, "You guys must have the most spiritual home."
Yes.
And
And
I'm
I
like,
even being very third party from that, even growing up, just like if I would throw out Kylie Olsen, oh, is that Greg Olsen's daughter? It was like you're kind of famous by association a little bit. It's like a weird kind of like status. But whenever I came over, it was always like, Greg, will you do the fireside? Will you do
Mhm.
this? Will you? He was very, I feel like, had a lot of status within both of your parents. So I
Yeah.
wonder how that shaped your reality of your place within the church, because you were very much like in that dynamic and culture every Sunday, every event, Relief Society, the bishopric.
Yeah.
Like, you guys were the Mormon family.
Yes, and you don't realize it as a kid, but when it's two-part, it's okay. This is our life. This is true. You are getting affirmations from everybody in your circle that this is, it's not up for negotiation. It's just the way
Yeah.
that it is, right? It's not like,
Yeah, that's
is
just
there an afterlife? Do we have to do all these things? It's just like, this is how it is. And so when that is non-negotiable, and then you take a young child saying, okay, this isn't this is just life. This is baseline. This isn't up for negotiation. This is fact. This is true. And then you pair that with someone like me, who in hindsight, I'm like, yes, I have probably the worst wiring for that kind of a religious format, where it's, I'm going to take the most important thing in the world to you, your family and everything that you love, and it's going to be the best thing in the entire world when you're with them forever, right? And then you find out, oh my gosh, but there's a chance that I'm not going to be with them forever. You know, like, at 6 years old, where it's, this is for sure how it is. But if you don't do it this exact way, everything's going to be taken from you.
that anxiety of,
The stakes are so high
high.
because it's the foundation of all of your dreams.
Oh my gosh. Yes, it was
and so you remember feeling that at an early age, like
such
that
an early
pressure.
age. Yes, learning about the three kingdoms and just realizing it is on my shoulders to make sure that I get to be with my family forever. And then it was this realization of, I'm just one variable in that. What if they do something that, you know, prevents me from, anyways,
Yeah, what if
all
my
that to
sister
say,
goes astray and we can't be together now? Yeah.
totally. I see that on one hand, the foundation that is so solid can be a very big blessing for some people. And on the other hand, that foundation that is so solid and non-negotiable can be a very insane breeding ground for obsessive compulsive tendencies and anxiety and a need for control and vigilance. And I think that a lot of those things have manifested into my adult life that I've had to battle in different ways outside of a religion. That again, at 31, I have so much compassion for that tiny kid, because it's like,
That's kind of where maybe the catalyst, a lot
Yeah.
of that started.
yeah.
So looking back, when you look at your younger years and then into junior high, high school, do you look back and think like those are happy years and I had happy times in the church? Or do you feel like that anxiety of regarding the church set in super young?
It's Again, such a good question. And I feel like every one of us would have similar answers. It's like talking about a relationship with an ex, you know, where it's like, well, no, on the other side of things, I'm really happy I'm not part of it in the way that I was, but there were so many wonderful things that I got from it and so many wonderful times while I was in it,
Yeah.
you know? So I think that there was a point where it was adding so much to my life, especially in my early years when all of my siblings were at home and there were 6 kids and you know, the singing, the songs, the getting up on Sunday mornings, going to church together, my parents being in Young Men, Young Women's and tagging along with them. There was so much joy in my early years. And then I can kind of see a turning point where my older siblings started to move out and go to college. And it was no longer this family thing. It was like, I don't want to go on Wednesday night. Like in my head, this is how the experience started to manifest was it then became a responsibility to go spend time with people who I didn't feel close with. Like I didn't have a lot of friends in Young Women's. And so it just really changed.
Switch from like a fun tradition
Yeah.
to like, oh, I'm going to go and
With these-
focus on doctrine. And that fun got taken out of it.
Yes. And I think it's just interesting. It's like a complete lottery. Like who's in your ward? What friends do you have?
That's what I was just going to say. It's like the community aspect of it can be your whole experience. I have the most fond memories of my childhood ward because my best friends were in the ward. It was like I got to go chill with my friends every Sunday. And then my leaders were so cool and so awesome. For me, it's like if I take away the community aspect, how important was the actual teachings and doctrines for me? Like, I don't know. But what I do know is like those people influence, which that's an amazing place where you can find those relationships and cultivate. Your first experiences with service is amazing, but I can see on the other side where it's like, I don't want to go to these events with these random people that I'm not really vibing with that aren't my people.
Yeah. But I'm always torn because I then look back and I'm like so thankful for how my mom raised me and pushed me to do certain things where it's really easy to just say, I don't like these people or I don't have a ton of things in common with these people. I'm not going to go and spend time with them. And the thing that she instilled in us very much was like, you can create bonds with anybody if you put forth effort, right? You might not want to get up in front of 200 people and give a 7-minute talk, but you're going to and you're capable of doing it, right? And the importance of commitment. I think any single thing in the church that you could decide to talk about, there's always going to be 2 sides of the coin.
Yeah. And you can take those good lessons that can transcend even religion, pushing your kids to do things
Right.
where it's like, yeah, you can find that connection. And you know what? Some things are going to make you uncomfortable and they are scary. But if you get past that, it's a life lesson. And so I'm sure there was so many life lessons along the way that were very specific to the church. But then coming out of it, you're like, I'm so grateful for those experiences and lessons.
100%. And I think you just have to start. There comes a point with a lot of things in life where it's, are the pros still outweighing the cons?
Yeah.
You know? And I think that tipping point is really uncomfortable.
So, okay, you get into high school. How was that? That's when you start learning like, what
Rebellion.
is it? Yeah, rebellion. Okay, what is this doctrine? This isn't just primary stuff. Is that when your brain started turning a little bit or?
I would say even before high school, because touching back on 6-year-old, overly anxious Kylie, OCD, knocking on wood, checking under the beds at night, having to say specific prayers to make sure that my family was okay. Like all of these tendencies that were just obsessive and controlling my life. I hit a breaking point in 7th grade. I remember being at Brick Oven with my family and hearing this like devastating story. It was crazy. I just remember that something snapped in me and I couldn't breathe and I had to get out of there. And it was that night. My dad was like, let's get you into therapy. Like, let's start trying some things. Like, it seems to be a lot. So I remember I started going to therapy and then my mom, in parallel to me, had been on her own journey through mental health and depression in the early 90s. And she'd spent a lot of years dedicated to developing her own relationship with a higher power and herself. And she's had a lot of resources and really good suggestions of spiritual books that I could turn to. And so she started introducing me to things like, there was an author named Byron Katie. We went to a workshop of hers in Salt Lake.
So were a lot of these LDS-based spirituality, or was it outside of the LDS
It was
religion?
outside of the LDS religion. And so my mom was very much an advocate for like, there's goodness everywhere and people everywhere who have access to whatever you want to call it, right? God and truth.
That's unique in the church. That was not my experience.
No.
At all.
I don't think it's a lot of people's
like
experience.
Frowned upon to look
and
at other doctrine.
My mom was really frowned upon. She was so loved and such a unifier. In every community that my mom sets foot into, she is so beloved and so integral, I feel like, to social dynamics. And so I think she got away with it because she was very loved, but she also had a reputation of being like woo-woo Sid. You know, she's kind of hippie. She's kind of out there. She wasn't afraid to say that she felt like there was truth and goodness outside of gospel doctrine on Sundays.
Which is so powerful for you to hear. Now, in my later years, I wish someone would have told me that.
Yes, but here's what's interesting. And it's not to my mom's. It wasn't a flaw because I can see that she was kind of backed into this position. But it was always so on her radar and therefore the family's radar of just be aware that if you say too much, that could start affecting dad and that could start affecting dad's career and their reputations and therefore our livelihood. So it was always deep inside of me. There was something that knew that me keeping my mouth shut equated to survival.
Literally, like dinner on the table.
No, for sure.
That's another level of an intense pressure that you probably felt at a younger age, and that could have contributed to some of those OCD tendencies.
Oh, so many things in hindsight. Maybe I'm getting this right, maybe I'm getting it wrong, but it definitely feels like a large coincidence that I have these tendencies and that now I can look back and see these threads through everything. So just to like briefly get through those young years, my mom introduced me to a lot of resources and books, meditations, different things around spirituality, centering yourself, right? All those things. And at a young age, I just started realizing like, oh, there's different things that can help me feel a peace inside that I don't get at church. But at that age, it was, I get peace in addition to church, right? And then at like 17, it was just your typical cry for help. I'm like, I need more attention from my parents who had already sent 4 kids. I'm one of 6, and they're a little bit like, the 2 youngest are left at home. We're a little bit checked out.
Yeah, like, okay.
And I'm just like, fine, if you're checked out, then I'm staying home from church on Sunday and I'm going to play rock band. With myself.
This is cute. I just like have this memory of young women just being like,
show my mind. There was like a year where I didn't go to church. I'd stay home and play freaking rock band.
That's a classic, just level extreme. Just like, we will rock.
Oh, and I did rock. And I think I was actually giving myself therapy. It was just raging out to
a creative outlet. Rock. That was your rebel phase. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
And so what were their opinions on that? Were they upset? Were they like, you have to go? Or were they just kind of like, okay, whatever, you rock?
I think they were just like, well, you're clearly not going to do it. But I do remember my parents not being fans of it, right? I think that I don't think anybody's responsible for it. I think parents are well-intentioned. I think the community is well-intentioned. But there's just it's never an awesome thing when you're in this culture and it's like, I'm not going to do it, right?
Yeah. When you're staying home on Sundays rocking, is it, I don't really believe in that anymore, so I'm going to stay home? Or is it, I just don't want to go? That doesn't sound fun to me. Or were you starting to question some of the doctrine?
Yeah. So I think in hindsight, the seeds were already planted of I call BS a little bit, right? But at the time, I don't think I could have put my finger on that, right? Because I didn't know where it was going to lead me a decade later. But at the time, I would have said, I just don't want to. And I feel like I don't have any power or control in my life. And this is something I can have power and control over.
So what was that mental tug of war like? Obviously, we know you, but we know that family is so important to you. And those relationships are so important to you. what is it like navigating, I'm going to do what's best for me. I'm going to disappoint my parents right now, and this might strain our relationship. But because I feel like so much of my spirituality is wanting to make my parents proud, wanting to make my brother proud, but then you kind of have to pick, I can't fake this belief. I have to follow my true north, you know?
Yeah.
And so was that hard at that beginning to kind of let your parents down, or do you feel like you had maybe resentment or something that it was easier?
Well, hang on. Put a pin in that. Do you feel like you ever experienced a full wave of disappointing your parents and feeling that like I'm letting them down if I don't do X, Y, or Z? And
I think 100%. And even just especially in religion and the church, the LDS church, it's like if I don't meet a guy and get married in the temple, I got 90% on my life. But if I would have just married a guy in the temple, I would have gotten 100%, and they would have been fully proud of me versus.
so was the temple always the thing? Because it's like you could have not graduated seminary or not gone to BYU or not gone on a mission. Parents don't care.
Yeah, like I didn't do any of those things.
Right.
So it was practice. But
for you, did it come down to
stick.
getting married in the temple would be the ultimate way?
I think that's just a pillar that we all reach towards.
Yeah.
As like you not getting married in the temple is the ultimate FU to your family and friends.
Right.
Kind of like, hey, like I'm actually not going to enter into this.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't get married till I was 30, so it's a little bit different. But I feel like when I was dating at like 22, 23, I felt so much pressure to get married in the temple.
Well, and I don't mean this facetiously, but we are taught, like we're singing songs about getting married in the temple at 5 years old.
Yeah.
And lessons about it. So there's a reason why it's so on your radar.
Yeah. But at such a young
30.
age, when that church was a tradition for you guys and family was so important to you, you've probably gotten more comfortable with it now. But was that a barrier that you had to come up against of like, okay, I'm going to have to let my family down, or maybe I'll just fake it till I make it to please my parents? What was that?
I do have to give a lot of credit to my parents in the sense that maybe there were a couple like, can you not make our lives difficult by staying home from church? Can you just
Come.
And your leaders are, you know what I mean? They were more kind of like that. They didn't love it, but it was never, ever in my mind a matter of whether or not they were going to be disappointed in me as a human.
Like they were going to accept you no matter what.
That's good.
It was amazing. And also my older siblings are all over the map. And so I feel like while my older sisters dealt with a very stereotypical faith crisis, which I don't even love that term, but while they were dealing with that deconstruction, I was kind of like, I don't know, I'm just reading about meditating, and my sisters are like finding out that the last 25 years of their lives have felt like an entire lie. And so I think they kind of not did the hardest thing, but paved a path for our family, and my parents too. They're nuanced. And so everybody just going through taking different paths up the same mountain kind of helped me not feel like everything was on my shoulders.
Yeah, and probably for your parents, by kid 5, they're like, like,
Probably.
you know, and so
For
I'm
better
sure
or
if you're
worse.
playing Rock Band, they're like, well, we've dealt with 4 other kids.
Yes.
And so that it's not the end of the world. And they know you and they know your heart. So it probably wasn't as intense. So you graduate high school, you're doing the adulthood thing.
Yeah.
Were you starting to kind of question that more? Were you getting more pressure? I'm on my own now. Where do I sit with this?
Yeah, it's like the time when you're entering singles ward and it becomes this, oh my gosh, this feels like a very tiny decision of do I want to wake up on Sunday and go to church? But if I start committing to that, where does that put me in 15 years? Am I married in the temple? Am I young women's president? Am I baptizing my kids? What kind of husband do I have? Like it just starts, I started realizing that small decisions in the moment were actually going to put my life on a very specific trajectory. And I had to start to think about some things.
Which is a very mature thought. Even the fact that you were thinking about those things is a clear indication of how serious you were taking your spirituality at the time. Because most people, it's just
Yeah.
kind of like you're on the conveyor belt. Let's stay because it's easy and like
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. No, and it was probably less profound when it was actually happening. I feel like I just looked up one day and what it felt like was some people will describe their relationship with the church or losing their faith in the church as like everything came crashing down, right? Like they had everything perfectly constructed and then it just broke.
Mhm.
And I feel like mine was so different. It was almost like if my spirituality was represented by a bucket of water, I feel like 7th grade, I started reading these self-help books. It was like, okay, we're going to add a hose and turn it on to this bucket of water, right? And it kind of just felt like I never emptied my bucket. One day I just looked up and I was like, "Oh, this is a completely different bucket of water." Right?
Wow. I'm
Because like
obsessed
the
with
water just
that.
overflows and so I didn't ever feel empty. It was just like this is now
Like replaced it with something else.
yeah, it's different water that's inside now.
That's beautiful.
Well, I,
It's like
it's yeah,
such
it
a
just really just
good,
what it was.
it's like such a good way to put it because in the church, that's not what you're taught. It's like if you don't have this, you're empty and you have nothing.
Yes.
But the way you put it is like I added and added and added, and now I'm full in other ways.
And I'm full in other ways. And that's part of my, I say I don't love the term faith crisis. I get that that's very accurate to people's experiences, but I don't think it's coincidental that people who choose something outside of the church can feel inferior or misunderstood when the terminology that we have always been raised with and that people in this community still use is they lost their testimony, right? Or like
Mhm.
they had a crisis. It's always coming from a place of lack,
Mm-hmm.
right? And even though people mean well, it's such an easy thing to just say, oh, they lost their testimonies. They're lost.
Well, and they're
What
missing the
else?
truth.
It's always lacking something.
Mhm.
And so I think subconsciously, when you're a believing member who watches somebody leave or you're a member who again leaves, like you're walking away from the thing, you're never stepping into something new, right?
Mhm.
They left. It's always being subconsciously ingrained on people who fall on both sides of this belief system that you're lacking something.
And it honestly
And
is so cool that you can keep sharing your story. Maybe this will be different, but that you didn't really have to feel that lack. I feel like that is true for a lot of people. And maybe you had that moment where you wake up and you're like, well, what do I believe in now? I'm trying to fill these empty holes. I'm trying to fill my empty bucket that is dry.
yeah.
And you being able to transition of just slowly adding things in, slowly taking things out is
Right.
such a cool, unique thing.
Right. It's weird. Even to just have somebody acknowledge, like, wow, that's a really cool experience. Like, you can breeze over that in a sentence, but I'm like, that's such a powerful acknowledgement to look at somebody and be like, wow, that's very cool. Because for such a large chunk of my, like, early 20s, just young dating life, it didn't feel like a good thing, right? I
Mhm.
felt like I was confused or missing something because there are these two different experiences that you're having when you live in this area and you were raised in this church, which is I feel that on the inside,
Mm-hmm.
but everything on the outside is telling me that I'm missing something. And that's being proven to me constantly socially, right? So you have this internal thing and this social thing, which is, for me, we're at constant odds with each other.
So explain that social thing. What were some of the social things that made it feel?
Yeah, maybe spiritually, I never had to feel the effects of my bucket being empty. But then when it came to dating and social life, it kind of started to hit me like, oh, freak, this is going to impact who wants to date me, right? What people think of me. Am I always a little bit inferior? Like we had, you guys know her, but a friend's mom tell a boy that I was dating, like, you can do so much better. She's not even an active member. And then a friend of ours, a guy friend of ours, told another kid I was hanging out with, like, hey, heads up. And I remember being sincerely hurt.
They're presenting it like it's some sort of baggage or something.
It's baggage. And how am I being reduced to this?
Like, you don't even know
Yeah.
what I think or believe or feel. It's very
Well, and that
demeaning.
you could be this kind of person, at least try to be the kind of person that you want to be. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to this thing, right? So it doesn't matter how much I am working on myself. It's all going to boil down to this. And this is going to be the make or
How
break for
smart
somebody.
you are, how
Yes.
good of a wife you're going to be, all of those things don't
Yeah,
matter
like,
if you're not an upstanding.
yeah,
Yeah.
member of the church.
Did you feel like you were having to prove yourself in those early 20s?
Yes. And I really don't know that whether you're in the church or have chosen something different, I don't know that any of us will ever fully be able to wrap our heads around how ingrained in us it is to be accepted into this in group and how much our security and survival depends on that.
Well, literally, in your case, your survival did depend on it. It's like
Yes.
our income is dependent on our social standing in the church.
Yeah. It was such a literal connection, right?
Mhm.
Thousands of years ago, being part of the in group literally meant warmth by the fire and food. And that connection represents something so much bigger. Survival. And so when you're thrown from that, it might just feel, in the 21st century, what that looks like is like, okay, a boy doesn't ask me out on a second date, but what my body is feeling on the inside is I'm being thrown from the fire, right? Like, am I going to have a family? Am I going to have kids? Am I going to be the exiled member of this tribe? And as much as people say, we accept you, we love you, we don't care, we don't judge you, I'm like, well, there is a reason why I still get a little shaky putting coffee in my cart at Harmon's grocery store because I'm terrified I'm going to see an old young women's leader,
Yep.
and I'm like, I disappointed you because it's more than just being able to own myself. It's like my body is feeling this threat of being thrown out and not accepted every time I reveal a little bit more to people that
About just basic everyday things about your life.
yeah, because it represents I'm not part of your tribe.
And then you expand out a little bit to that sentiment, and it's like, oh, there must be something very fundamentally ingrained in us to have those intense feelings.
Yeah.
And then you really go into this cultural aspect of this specific religion, and it's like I was bred to feel thrown from the fire.
Yeah.
And that's what's so crazy is you
Oh,
can
yeah.
pinpoint all of these things.
Well, and you can unsubscribe from all of those things, but they're still subconsciously like in your brain
Yeah.
forever.
Yes.
And you have to constantly fight that.
Yes.
And I resonate with that of dating and being like, okay, I have to fill in the rest of the picture of my life. What does my life look like moving forward? Because I've been told that I need to do X, Y, and Z to have a family. How am I going to raise my kids? How am I going to find a husband who aligns with what I want and who's somewhere maybe in the middle
Yeah.
and like wants the family tradition of this, but also is down for me to like explore. So at that moment, like at that time when you were dating, what kind of guy were you looking for?
Oh, I love just hearing somebody else put words to my experiences because I'm like, oh, sometimes you heal in retrospect, right? And so even to hear you, I'm like, oh, you just gave a gift. 21-year-old Kylie, maybe being like, yes, that's how it felt. It's just, it felt impossible because so many of the things you just said were my exact experience. I am not looking for somebody who's standing on a street corner at General Conference being like, that you guys are fools,
Yeah.
like Bible bashing, trying to just spend their lives hating the church. So many of the things that I wanted still aligned with the church. I just happen to not believe any of it.
Well,
the
like,
gospel. So
when you're so naive at that age, I feel like we all were.
yeah.
Where it's like, okay, am I gonna date someone or marry someone who's not a member? And what does that look like? You want all those people? That sounds scary.
Totally.
Yeah, that's
Because
like
you
I
can be
can't.
halfway across the world in Japan, and if I to this day see like Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I'm like, oh, a little bit of home.
Safe.
I know you. You know what I mean? Like we have this, and so I think the same thing happened in dating, where it was, I felt like I knew what I was getting into with somebody who was in the church, which is not true. Oh, spoiler. But I wanted somebody who I felt like we had a similar heritage, just because it was going to spare so many issues of like, my family does this, or they go to this baptism. But will I find somebody who doesn't want to raise our kids in the church, right? And it just became more and more and more daunting.
Were you dating members, non-members? Because Sammy just asked a question, like, what were you looking for? Did you even feel like you had this ability to have, I know what I'm looking for, or was it like, I need to be this type of person for people to want me?
Well, I'm wondering, Sammy, if you felt this, where it's, okay, this is what I'm looking for. I want somebody who is basically a copy paste of me, where they know the background, but they're ready to move on from it.
When you think it doesn't exist.
You think it doesn't
You
exist.
think who else is in the gray? And
Yes.
you realize, then once you date people and you get to know them, you're like, oh, more people are like me than I think.
Yeah. Was there ever a point, though, where you were basically prepared to accept your sealed fate? Because I would go back and forth and say, okay, I just have to do this thing, right? I'm going to just commit to a life of being in the church, even though I don't believe it. I'll be a nuanced member. I'll be someone from the inside who tries to change it. So I'm like, do I just accept that and try to find somebody who's all in and we just have our differences? Or was it like hell-bent on finding somebody who...
See, I think I dated a lot of, I mean, obviously I dated for a lot of my 20s. Most of the guys I'd meet on the LDS, because there were so many times when I was single where I'm like, okay, I need to reel it back in. I'm going to give it my best effort. I'm going to go to church. I'm going to meet people. I'm going to be like whoever I need to be to find a freaking husband, you know? But then I would be on the dating apps and the LDS dating app. I would go out with guys and they'd try and like hook up with me on the first date, or they ended up being the worst guys.
Yeah.
And I had to build that belief within myself of like, just because you have like LDS.org in your Instagram bio doesn't mean that you are going to be the guy for me, or that you're going to be a better dad than this other guy who
Doesn't go to
was
church.
raised Catholic.
And it
or
actually
doesn't go to church.
does not say anything about your character to be affiliated or claim
I think
membership in
that's
this
the
church.
biggest behind the curtain.
Yeah, you have
you're
to
not-
adopt that belief though.
Yeah, you're not
because,
taught.
Like
to-
I dated a guy for a long time who wasn't LDS, or he was leaving the church, and that put such a strain on me. My family was so worried for me, and like I was like, this is the end of the world if I marry someone who's not in the church. But then as years went by, I was like, no, it's actually not a big deal. My relationship and who I want to end up with and what I believe in, making sure he's aligned with that versus aligned with what they want, is so much more important.
Well, because in the end, I'm sure that Hayden has turned out to be so much of what they would have always hoped for you.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? But actually, I feel like this question touches on something so much bigger, which is exactly why having this conversation means so much to me, because it's so stupid and crazy to me that we are still dealing with this or this. It's like, do I want somebody who's all this, or do I want somebody who's all this? And it's like, there is a big, fat, huge middle ground that nobody's making space for, or that it's really hard to live in that space and have that space be acknowledged as something legitimate, right? Like, I think what I struggled with for so many years was, I don't want people to know that Taylor and I don't go to church, because immediately they're going to fill in all of those buzzwords of anti-Mormon.
Yeah.
Or angry or bitter. It's, you kind of jump away from this ship and you are immediately labeled as something that feels so inaccurate to what your actual experience is. So I'm desperately trying to prevent people from finding out, because I don't want to be reduced to this. If they knew that our lives basically look the exact same, they wouldn't label me as any of these things. But the hard part is, at least for me, I feel like I made a deal with the devil of like, yes, you can leave this thing and you can live this life so happily with your husband, so long as you don't really tell anybody about it, right? You have to be silent, because if you open your mouth and share your thoughts or anything from your heart or your experience, it feels offensive to people who still really believe. Because I've heard that so many times, and whether or not, maybe that's just my experience, but I think what I hear so often is, why can't you just leave it alone? Or why do you have to talk about it? You know, a friend of ours was talking about a girl we went to high school with who has a podcast. She was like, we get it. Like, leave it alone, you know? And I remember pushing back and just saying, I think that's missing the point a little bit, because it is not about spreading negativity to something that means a lot to you guys. It is, where are we supposed to go? Where do we go to feel safe? You know, and my sister, who is still, the gospel means so much to her and her family. And I'm like, that's great for you. And I sincerely mean that. But we've had to have some really hard conversations but I desperately want to feel safe in my beliefs, because who do I have if I can't talk about?
Well, it's almost like if you're in the church, those beliefs are positive. If you
Yeah.
leave the church and you have beliefs, like they are beliefs,
Yeah.
those are negative beliefs because they're technically contradicting their beliefs.
Yes.
But it's also your beliefs are contradicting mine. So why are yours the positive ones and mine are the negative?
That's such a good way to say it. I took 7 minutes to try to explain that, and you condensed
Yeah,
that because
no.
it's, and I think there's something that's very, if I'm being honest, like envious and jealous of people who are still in the church, because I'm like, you guys have a built-in community
Yeah.
and a built-in place to go every Sunday where you get to bear your hearts and wear it on your sleeves. And not only are you accepted there, but you're praised and you are being cheered on, right? And your kids have a place to go, or like everybody is just boosting each other up because of your shared beliefs. And whether you call yourself an ex-Mormon or nuanced Mormon or whatever, it's just, I really firmly believe that we should all have a place to go. We all deserve to have a place of belonging where we don't feel like we're silenced in order to be tolerated.
Yeah, and even if that means I'm allowed to speak my truth, but also I'm realizing I think my biggest thing lately is I don't need your validation or your validation or these
Yeah.
people I'm searching for, because they might not be able to give me that. They might not be able to give me reassurance and validation or praise about my life, but that's okay. I don't need that, because at the end of the day, it's me. I have to live with myself and my happiness and my growth and develop in my highest values. And if I can live with myself and know that my compass is pointed where it needs to go, my true north, that's all that matters to me. But I'm going to give you love and respect and the ability to talk whatever you want, even if you can't give that back to me, because I don't need that from you. And that was my biggest thing, where I was searching so hard for acceptance and validation and please someone hear me, listen to me. But then when I turned it inwards and started looking at myself and giving myself that ability to listen and be heard, I'm like, wow, what I'm saying matters, and it's mattering to me. And if that can propel me to be a better person, a better mom, a better wife, I don't care if someone's upset about that.
Right.
Because I know that I'm becoming a better person. Regardless if you don't believe that that's how I should be a better person, then that's on you. That's not on me.
Okay, but I'm so curious, how does that manifest internally and how does it manifest externally for you? Because I think I have experienced that I just need myself to know. I just need Taylor to know. As long as we know, we're good. And then I've also experienced the loneliness of feeling like I'm not allowed to have a voice, you know? And so how do you decide when to literally use your voice with people and when you take the route of, I know, and I don't need to necessarily vocalize that or make that public knowledge in order to feel seen or heard or worthy?
It's been hard. I've had some really hard conversations with the people closest to me in my life, my in-laws or my mom or some of my friends that are very devout members, and having to push back on that and be like, I want to be accepted by the people that I love the most. And I'm realizing they love me. They do. And at the end of the day, when we're just vibing and talking and hanging out and stuff, it's like, I know you love me and accept me. I know that. But their words are very contradicting to that.
But they
because
don't love and accept your beliefs. They
Yeah.
cannot accept your beliefs, and
Well-
that's hard.
well,
Right.
in order for them to truly be like, you know what, maybe it's not for everyone. Maybe you are a better person outside of that. That calls into question their core beliefs. That's what's confusing to me. To give me acceptance requires them to lose a core foundation of their identity.
And not
And
only
that's
not only a core belief, but like the most core desire, which is I have a lot of compassion when I look at it through the lens of I'm not just asking you to accept my belief, because if you accept my belief, then you are accepting that this concept of eternal family might not exist. You know, to them, it's not just a matter of your mom saying, Chelsey, if this is better for you, I'm so happy. It's a matter of your mom saying, okay, I might not see you in the afterlife, and I have to be okay with that. And in what world is a mom just fine to say that
Yeah.
and be chill about it? So I can understand,
from that perspective.
that it's easier
Their
for
stakes are
us.
still so high.
Yes, our
Yeah.
stakes are not as high as theirs to accept where they're coming from. I have a really hard time keeping that in my head when I'm in these interactions with people because it feels unfair. But that's the reality of what's going on.
I know it's just hard because I'm like, I'll bury the body with you. I will literally, who cares if this thing made you upset? Let's go. I'm done. And I'm not saying I want them to be done or anything. I want them to look at me as a human being, how I was for the last 5 years of intense anxiety, trying to I know what I need to do and I know what's right and I know the truth. I know it. I have to do this. And dying inside.
Yeah.
I felt like I was dying. Like my anxiety was bleeding from every pore because I was trying to shove myself in the right direction and it wasn't working.
Yeah.
But I was still accepted.
Mm-hmm.
I was still included. I was still by the fire.
Yeah.
But I was like being burned alive.
You just had to pay a pretty penny to have a seat by that fire.
But the moment I was like, I cannot do this. I have to put this on the back burner and focus on, and I had to go really back to the basics. What are my core values? Kindness, service, honesty. And every single day, how can I honor a core value? I want to be service oriented. Okay, let's call a neighbor. Let's drop off cookies, whatever. I want to be extra kind today. Okay, I'm not going to gossip. I'm making these very intentional practices to have those core beliefs and not trying to be like, okay, I need to read my scriptures. I need to pray. I need to go to all my meetings. I need to do all these things. When I took it back to the basics, what happened? Chelsey started becoming alive. I became less anxious. I was literally able to get off of my anti-anxiety medications I've been on for 8 years. My life became better and fuller and everything started coming into color. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is feeling so good because I'm not putting so much pressure on myself. And I just kind of put everything else on the back burner a little bit.
Yeah.
And then I started growing and expanding. And the people that mean the most to me that see that, I want them to be like, yes, I see you. You're in color now.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's okay. I think it's okay to want to be admired. I think that's something that you lose is no one, my active family members aren't going to look at me and admire me and admire my beliefs and the way I live my life.
Right.
And you miss out on that feeling. And it's okay to want your best friend and your in-laws to be proud of you and be proud of the way that you're living your life.
Totally.
But it's so funny because I think for a long time I was trying to live and please so many people in my life, keep the peace, do what I'm supposed to do, that I was losing myself. And now that I'm gaining myself back, I'm not worried. I'm not scared. I'm more excited. I'm excited about a spiritual journey, wherever that may take me. This is how I'm feeling today, but maybe in 5 years I'll feel totally different. Who knows? But that's exciting to me versus scary.
Yeah.
And that's what I want with my kids. I want them to be super excited about a spiritual journey and not scared. For me, a spiritual journey felt very scary. It was like, if it's not this direction, then it's wrong and bad. And for my kids, I'm like, I want you to be so excited. Like, spirituality is amazing. And wherever that leads, I want to give them all the tools to be like, wow, this is amazing and exciting. And I have so much autonomy and let's go, you know? So that's how I'm feeling.
So I want to hear how you met Taylor and what that was like navigating everything you had talked about of people talking about you or knowing that you maybe didn't believe in the church or weren't living it. How were those dynamics of meeting Taylor and then getting married? Did you guys have discussions about where you stood, and was he receptive of those? Was he on the same page?
Yeah. Luckily, I seriously thank my angels every single day, because the biggest conflict when it came to the church in meeting Taylor and marrying Tay was his family. And I have to say, hang on, they're credible with it. But that was when I say the hardest part or the biggest conflict, it was in letting them down, right? It was never between Taylor and I. It was always like Tay and I against the world. Okay, so the way that I met Taylor was he served his mission with Brandon Wardrop, our friend Brandon. So I knew that he was a missionary in the church, all of the things. And then when we sat down, we were talking, I remember him saying, like, my sister's my best friend in the entire world. And like briefly mentioning that she hadn't been active for a long time, that his older brother had left the church, and he loved his family so much. He went on about them for like 10 minutes on our first date and very briefly touched on them not having anything to do with the church. And I remember that tiny breadcrumb. I was like, that's all I need, right? There are people in his life so close to him, and there was not an ounce of, it's sad, it's really hard, they're confused, but I just keep praying for them. It was none of those typical things that you would expect to hear from a returned missionary whose family was completely in a different place than him. And so from the very beginning, I just felt so safe and comfortable with him and being completely transparent. It never came down to one devastating or difficult conversation. It was, he created such an easy and safe atmosphere to be completely me, and he felt totally safe being completely him, right? From the beginning, I knew that there were differences in us. I also knew that he was very open to a life that I had only dreamt were possible, right? Of maybe we don't end up in the church together. Maybe that's not the path for us, but I believe in this, this, and this. And so as long as we have that, he was like, Kai, I'm totally good with where you're at and where we might end up at, as a couple. But again, I think once he and I were in lockstep, it was about all these external markers, like you mentioned earlier, Sammy, like, okay, we're going to get engaged. And now we have to decide, are we getting married in the temple? Right. And now, so.
Did you guys go to church together while you were dating?
Yes. So when we decided to get married, we had a lot of conversations, and I know that to each their own, right? But Tay and I decided that we didn't want our day to be overshadowed by family's opinions or their sadness or disappointment that we weren't getting married in the temple. So I was like, babe, if this is going to make your life easier, and if this is what we have to do, I'll do it, right? So we started going to my home ward while we were engaged, bishop, stake president, all of it. And I was like, this is
Wild.
Yeah.
Is that hard
It was
to
hard
go back into that?
for me.
Yeah.
Yes. Sincerely, he was the only thing, Taylor, was the only thing that made it palatable. So I was able to swallow everything on the outside because, again, I knew what Taylor and I were creating on the inside. But I think inevitably, I don't think it's good for your health. I don't think that it is sustainable at all when you are living something so different to what you're feeling on the inside. And so we got married end of June. And I remember end of July, Taylor and I were going to our family ward, and I went twice. And the bishop pulled me in and was like, can we call you into the primary? And I remember going home and just being like, Tay, I don't want to be a bitter person. I don't want to be a negative person. I just want to live my life and do my thing. And I am realizing that I don't stand a chance of being anything but bitter and negative if I am forced to sit in that building every single Sunday. I felt the way you felt, Chelsey, of just, I am crawling inside of my own skin, and I don't want anything but to just do my own thing. And so that was 3 weeks after we got married, and we have not been back since
And
then.
so he was just like, deal, we don't need to go. We're good.
Was that hard for him? Obviously, we can't really speak on his behalf.
No, I don't think he would mind. It was hard for him in the sense that I think it's hard for most people who choose something different, which is, oh, you miss out on a lot of those rite of passages. I think especially as a male, Taylor grieved a lot of things because he is, I might start crying and I blame it on the pregnancy. He is sincerely the human that I pray Banks ends up to be like him. He's the most incredible man. It might be harder for me to have to watch him set his ego aside in a community where males are so revered for callings and being a priesthood holder, right? And having to grieve certain traditions of, to Taylor, what stepping away meant was, oh my gosh, I'm never going to get to bless our babies, right? I'm never going to get to baptize our kids. I'm never going to get to do father's blessings in the traditional sense, right? Because we very much still do things like that. But it was interesting for both of us, for me to have empathy for him in grieving things that I didn't have to grieve. And also eye-opening for him to realize, oh, those were going to have to be traditions and events and rites of passage that Kylie had to sit on the outside and watch me participate in with our kids. Right? And so I think he realized too that maybe what was going to be very beautiful for him is kind of a big, fat, huge bummer for me.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So
It's not, and it changes it if it's not what you guys are doing as a family and doing it together versus you on the outside watching.
yes, it's now we get to create. And so I think he and I don't know. I think I'll always look back on that. I would call that time of my life, funny enough, the closest thing to leaving the church or like a faith crisis. You know what I mean? Because that's when we had to go through telling his parents and kind of putting
Coming
our
out with
flag in the
it.
ground.
Yeah.
Coming out and owning it and just saying, this is what we're doing. And I feel like I'm realizing all this real time that I got to do what a lot of people have to do alone with my husband and my favorite person in the world. Of like, what are we going to create? Right? And who are we going to be? And what's our life going to look like?
And that's so exciting.
That's the word
Where you
yes.
didn't feel this scary lack and loss. It was like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm receiving so much and this is so exciting. And I'm
Yeah.
excited to see where this next chapter leads.
Yeah.
It's
And
so
what do we get to
special.
create as a couple, parents, and
So what does that
family?
look like moving forward, navigating those family relationships or how you
Yeah.
guys want to raise your kids? And did you laid down that foundation pretty solid before you started having kids to where you guys are just on the same page?
It's constantly changing. Like you guys both said, I realize that what feels very comfortable for us now is going to change in 3 years when Banks is like, back up. What? Who's Heavenly Father? What's the Holy Ghost? What is my cousin doing in this bathtub getting dunked under the water?
Yeah.
We are going to have to enter this phase all over again.
A lot
our
of terrain
kids-
you're going to have to navigate.
Exactly. We're going to have to approach it instead of just as a couple. We're going to have to approach it as a family. And what does that look like? But as far as right now goes, I think from the very beginning, Tay and I knew that it was going to be a long game of, as people find out that the church is not going to play the conventional part in our lives, it was almost like a challenge that we were handed of like, yeah, people are going to have concerns. People are going to maybe think that our life is going to end up in one place, take this direction, but like, challenge accepted. You might not see the fruits of our labor for 5 years, 10 years, however many years, you may never, but I think we just trusted that over time, our lives and our actions would speak louder than our words or any conversation that we could have with people that we loved who are concerned about us, which is at times really comforting and at times really frustrating because it's like, hello, how could you be worried about us? It is Friday night and we are watching The Office. Our lives are identical to what they would be if we were in the church. We just keep Banks just knows what coffee is, you know?
Mhm.
How's your relationship with spirituality
Yeah.
right now?
I think I'm realizing how many times can I say it's always changing or that's such a good. I just feel like, is that not life? The only constant is change, because for a very long time before having Banks, I had years of a very formal, regimented practice of getting up in the morning and lighting a candle and meditating and journaling and now every day is so different that I don't necessarily have the same time to be as formal about it. But in a really weird way, it's become more meaningful and more beautiful. I would call my spiritual practice now just life of, can I sit in the bathroom while I watch Banks take a bath and look at his tiny little eyelashes with water bubbles on the end of them and be so incredibly present for that, where we are all God in this moment. Like, this is the pulsating reality of what people are trying to feel at church and in the temple and in meditation and in reading self-help books. If I can't do this, if I can't feel that in this moment, then like what is the point of participating in any formal religious or spiritual practice if making him peanut butter honey toast in the morning feels tedious and like a drag? So
I know. I feel the same way. My spirituality is so tied to motherhood right now. Because
yeah.
I think my biggest thing when I started putting the church on the back burner was after Rooney was born. The months leading up to his birth, it was the most intense pressure where I felt like I had to choose a path. I was like trying to double down with the church, trying to do all these things. I was feeling so low. Rooney's born, and I look at him and I'm like, whatever is on the other side, this is the closest thing. Like, this right here is the meaning of everything. And everything else kind of melted away.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to hone in that feeling constantly throughout my life. These are the moments. This is what makes me human. This is my point on this planet Earth, experiencing this. And that could be in a sunset. That could be in a conversation with some of my best friends. That could be in a yummy donut.
Yeah.
That could be listening to a song. It can be so many things. And that's what's so amazing for me about spirituality is it's not this specific only journey. It's
Yeah.
in everything.
Well, and I think the hard reality, everything you just listed, are very sweet moments. And I think something this year I've had to come to terms with is, can I bring the same presence in the really gut-wrenching hard moments?
Such a good point.
Right? Like there's a bunch of family stuff that happened this year that rocked our world. And I was like, what? This is not fun spirituality. I don't like this one. You know what I mean? Like, I'll show up in presence when I'm getting Banks ready for bed, but I don't want to do it when I feel things inside my family are falling apart. And truly, sincerely, I don't know that I've ever seen somebody walk through such a devastating life event with so much grace, and not a false grace, right? Not a disingenuous surrender to it, but like in the most sincere way, watching you lose your mom and show up in grief and sadness and anger and also creating beauty out of it. I'm like, you did the whole damn thing. Like, you went through, you didn't run from any of it. And I'm like, that's also God. That's also spirituality, is like in the middle of the shit and the mud. Can you surrender to it in a way that's not, oh, goodness exists despite of this, but this is life also, right? And
the
there's
experiences.
yeah,
Mhm.
like, I feel like I could spend, Chelsey, I know you know, but I feel like I could spend so long just singing Sammy's praises on being so incredibly genuine and such an incredible example of strength and tapping into spirituality, because I think we all grew up where losing someone was dealt with in such a generic way of like, cling to the gospel and I know we're going to see them again. And I'm like, that is such an awesome elevator pitch. But watching you was like, oh,
This is
that
the reality
this
of
is
what
the
it is.
reality
Yeah.
of it. Like the depths of hell, but also the joy
Yeah.
and
Just kind of the
yeah,
walking through fire on the other end of like, whoa.
Well, and there is so much joy in grief because there is, that's life. There's happy and sad, and there's both
yeah,
sides of something can be so painful but so beautiful at the same time.
yeah.
So I'm curious, I mean, selfishly, I'm curious how you process the afterlife. Do you ever have confusion or panic about not knowing, or do you feel like you know what happens after this?
I I don't I think being in the church, I would have said I believe in an afterlife just because that's what the church was, right? And it was based on faith and belief. And I feel like funny enough now, you would think I would be more inclined to say it might be complete dark matter and there's nothing after this. But become more scientifically convinced that there is something after this. Because there is an entire universe in Sammy and an entire universe in Chelsey. And when your heart stops, you're telling me that just disappears into the earth and we just go on. It doesn't make sense that that would cease. I don't know what form it takes.
Even just energy has to go somewhere. Like, where does that
Exactly.
energy?
The law of physics, that energy leaves us and it has to go somewhere. And I know you know this more than anyone, like those signs from your mom, you know, and I'm just convinced. I'm just like, you'll never convince me that we don't go on.
Yeah.
But it's not from a place of fear. I'm just like,
Yeah, it just makes sense.
yeah.
And it's
And
kind of like the beauty in the unknown is also exciting. And
But-
it's really scary and daunting in a lot of ways. And then in other ways, but that's also part of this experience of trusting in the unknown,
Yeah.
you
And
know?
just surrendering to it.
Yeah.
I watched this interview last week of this guy talking about his mom dying and wanting to know what happens after. And he's like, you bang your head against that brick wall so many times where you finally just surrender of like, okay, I give up, you win. We're never going to know what happens after this. You can believe in things or think that, okay, I think this is what happens after this, but none of us know.
Still in your head. What's in your head? Like, what do you
I mean,
cling
it's always,
to?
it's the same thing. It's always changing.
Yeah.
Like I, have told Chelsey, like, I hope something's after this, but it's hard in losing someone so close to me. And maybe it's just the stage of grief I'm at to feel how could someone I was so close to be out there still and I can't feel her as much as you would think I would with the woman who gave me life, you know? And so in my mind, I've had to deconstruct my faith and deconstruct my grief of what if there is nothing? And I think where I'm at right now is if there is something, it's not the same as this life. And I'm currently right now coming to terms with if your mom's still out there, it's not going to be the same. And I'm grieving that this worldly relationship, how things were, it's never
making Christmas chocolates.
Yeah,
You want to
like,
believe
it's
that you're going to
never
make
gonna
Christmas
be the
chocolates
same.
again and
Yeah.
you're having to come to terms with.
Yeah. And so I think that is just grieving that and then, knowing that you're not just going to die and you're going to go up and she's not going to be in the same form that she was in or whatever. So I don't know. I get so confused and I just love hearing people outside because, I talk to family and they're like, Sam,
Your mom
because of Christ, because of him, you can see her again and she's here and she's always with you. And I'm just like, is she though? I don't know. It's just different for me. And so I love hearing what people's take on the afterlife is outside of religion and how they process it and what it looks like to them.
And ultimately, I think it's all in our head. Like what this person believes and is so confident in it, what you believe and you're at peace with that, we're never going to know until we know. And so again, it might just be changing forever, our opinions on what is tolerable for me to believe in today during this season of my life.
I
right?
know. And just not being married to anything sounds so amazing to me. Oh, cool. I could literally have a completely different opinion tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I think I was so resistant to that for so long of change because I was like, no, it has to be this. It has to be this. And now that I'm open to that, it's so freeing.
Well, and I just love your perspective when I talk to you about these things, even you just acknowledging this is the stage of grief that you're in right now and it's subject to change, or you're okay with not having to pick a lane or okay with being like, I don't know what's after this, but I know it's whatever is after this is better. whatever's after this includes Rooney and baby and utter bliss that I feel when becoming a new mom. That is so comforting to me. That's not even an answer, but a perspective that I admire so much.
Thanks, babe.
This is why you guys are best friends.
Kylie's like,
Today is not deep-ish. Today's deep. But also, I think that like what you just did is, for me, I'm like, oh, that's exactly what's made you go through this whole process of losing your mom the way that you have. Because you could be so hardened and so unopen to anybody else's perspectives. And you said it's not an answer, it's a perspective.
Yeah.
And I think you remain open all the time, and you create such safety and provide so much validity to other people's experiences, even when you have loads of your own. And I think you're just open to teach me. Sure, maybe this, maybe that, maybe not. You all do.
That's
it's really
such
amazing.
The power of sharing and vulnerability, and even having this podcast is like, we get to hear such cool perspectives, and I can move forward in my spirituality and be like, think of that bucket analogy, and I'm going to add things in and share that with my kids, where I'm like, you can be whatever you want to be, you know?
Yeah.
You can live how you want to live and believe what you want to believe and whatever feels true to you. And I think it's inspiring to be open to other people's perspectives, and to be willing to share yours is so powerful.
Yes.
No, you guys are so good at that.
Kai, thank you so much for coming on. I could literally talk to you for 5 more hours.
I'm like, what did I say?
No, you did everything.
You just blacked out. Come true. No,
Thank
but
you
like
guys. This was
I
healing for me.
told you this. Like, this is why we are doing this, is for people like you, and just we really appreciate you being willing to share your story and to talk to us.
No, you guys are the best. You're literally 2 of the easiest people on the planet to talk to. I love you so much.
Okay, thanks again for coming on. Okay,
Love
guys,
you
we
guys.
will talk to you next week.
Once again, that's deep-ish. Deep-ish.
Okay, love you. Bye.
Bye.